raised her hand.
Okay. I'll get that.
His father's a doctor and his brother works in the industry, but it sells the COVID
All right,
test.
the weird echo hopefully is gone. Hopefully. All right, so as you can see, the picture up here is me and my dress blues. I just figured I'd go through a little bit of my military history. I dropped out of art school, joined the Army, and now you just killed my video.
Oh, sorry.
Remember, that's me.
I know, I was trying to find out when she was. Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to put it back on him in the quilts?
There. I need to get rid of this.
Okay.
She's trying to help.
There you go.
All right, so I dropped out of art school, joined the Army, and joined for military intelligence, which I really thought was a great thing. As it turns out, I was infantry with a security clearance. I had a backpack. We buried stuff in the ground to detect enemy movement. I went to Korea, which was a great time up on the DMZ, 8 months up there, and then came back, went to Fort Campbell, jumped out of helicopters and airplanes for a little while, and then went into recruiting duty. Great time. And then, of course, the Army decided they didn't need my military job anymore, so they were getting rid of it. So they said either get out on a college drop, go back to school, or reclass and pick a new job. Well, shoot, I'll go back to college. This ought to be fun. Of course, went to Central Michigan University, got my bachelor's degree, and then realized I missed the Army. Went back to Fort Hood, and then deployed twice. Somebody's sound is on. Who can't find anything?
Oh dear.
Gremlins. Gremlins are taking.
Dinner's on the stove.
Who's not muted? Can't find it.
Oh well.
Everybody,
Okay.
please mute. Somebody's talking. Oh well.
Okay, so I went to Iraq a couple times, and after I got back, I decided I was going to get out. I was needs of the Army, got stop loss. Well, anyway, I got out of active duty, and of course, you know, missed it. I'm that soldier through and through, so I joined the National Guard, and was supposed to go to Afghanistan. We got all ready to go, and then they canceled our orders. So I have 2 deployments to Iraq. In the grand scheme of things, the military has always been what I've fallen back onto. So now I'm an instructor. I teach logistics and warehouse, a little bit of computer stuff, and of course networking and satellites. So anyway, in the grand scheme of things, like any other soldier who's been at war, I came back with PTSD and tried video games. I have 100,000 plus hours of video game time that I can never get back, and I have nothing to show for it. I could tell you all right now that I was the #1 PvP player on World of Warcraft as a level 80 troll hunter, and it's not going to do anybody any good. So
Would you please come over to my house and talk to my grandson?
so then, of course, you know, the PTSD stuff, video gaming was my outlet. I was allowed to separate myself from the world and feelings and all of that, but as it turned out, I really didn't feel anything anyway. As you train and get used to going overseas, you shut your light switch of emotions off. That way, while you're over there actually on patrol, you can't be affected by a kid standing on the side of the road doing this, saying that he's hungry, when in fact his dad is standing behind him with an AK-47 pointed at you. So in that emotional numbness of me shutting off my feelings, even though they were off and I couldn't feel anything, the only time I could feel something is if I watched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, or that the one where the golden buzzer with Simon and all them. So as soon as they hit the golden buzzer was the only time that I actually cried and could feel anything. That's just the way that emotional numbness goes, which was good in a way and bad in others. It's part of what you do to get past things and onward and upward. And anyway, so that's my military story, and that's okay. We'll admit a couple more people and try to be a happy clicker and get them quick as I can. So, of course, you know, I come back, I got PTSD, I met a wonderful wife and get married, and she says, hey, we don't do enough together. And I'm like, what do you mean we don't do enough together? We're remodeling a house, we do yard work, I visit your parents. I love you, but I'm not working with you. No. So I didn't know what to do. I honestly didn't know what to do. How do you spend more time with your significant other when she has her hobbies and I have mine, and you work, but otherwise we spend time together? One day I beat her home from work, opened the mailbox, was a Joanne fabric quilted table runner, 2 for 1. I thought, I'm gonna go down in history as the greatest man in the world. I'll make one for my mom, she'll make one for her mom. We did it together, 3 women happy for $30. I mean, how do you beat that? So of course, we go to Joanne's, we go to this wonderful class. There was only 3 people in the class, me, my wife, and this other woman. This other woman spent the whole time fighting with her cheap machine. I got completely done with the table runner. My wife is struggling a little bit, and the teacher went to go help her, and she looked over at me and said, you're done? And I said, yeah, I'm done. And I held it up, and she's like, oh. She said, you've sewn before? And I said, no, I haven't sewn before. And she said, you must have sewn before. And I was like, no, ma'am, I've never sewn before. I said, I just follow instructions well. It's what the Army has trained me to do. So I thought, well, shoot, if I can make a table runner, I can make a quilt. I mean, a lap quilt isn't much bigger than a table runner, right? Okay, so we, let's see if I can click into, so that's the class. That's Flea, the teacher, helping my wife. And while we were there purchasing the fabric, because I didn't know anything about quilt shops, because I thought quilt shops were like people who had like all sorts of experience, and it was like high society quilt shops, and I thought craft stores were just that for the mediocre dabbler like I was. So we go back, and as we're there, we meet the husband and wife team, which are the group leader for Quilts of Valor in North Knoxville. And Dennis invites me to an all men's group, and in the men's group is 3 veterans. Well, anyway, as we're sitting there talking and stuff, they talk about the Quilt Guild and all this stuff, and I had entertained it because I was there, being social. But as it turns out, I bought the fabric to make the quilt, and so Dennis invited me to the men's group. I go to the men's group. After I get there, I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna die today. I'm the only guy here. I'm in a guy's basement, and he lured me here, and I came willingly, and my pistol's in the truck. And then my wife pulls in, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is the men's group. What is she doing here? On that day, my very first meeting of men's group, I was awarded a Quilts of Valor from Dennis and Doylene, and of course I brought it. So it is worn, used.
That's a good thing.
Okay, so believe me, it's definitely seen worse. Okay, so I decided I was going to make a lap quilt. Here's my lap quilt. It is on a king-size Amish frame and turned out to be a queen. I mean, who doesn't have the repetitive OCDism? Well, anyway, when I got to this point, I realized I didn't like it. The purple was not my choice of fabrics. And after I quilted it on my little tiny 9-inch throated Juki, it was time for something else. So I gave it away and made this one.
Cool.
And this is the first quilt that I didn't know about putting snuggle flannel on the back.
Oh, I like your quilting spiral.
I didn't quilt this.
You didn't? Okay.
While I was at military training, my wife made a comment on a Facebook page that she was proud that I completed a project, which was the other quilt, and this woman in Michigan volunteered to quilt it for me.
Wow.
And I didn't like the quilt. So I sent her a message. I said, ma'am, I really appreciate it, but is there a way that I can send you a different one, because I don't want to keep this other one. So I sent her this one. She quilted it and sent it back to me. All right, now, okay, so the men's group said, hey, maybe you ought to make a quilt for the quilt show. So I had one in my head, you know, that I wanted to make, and if I made one, so I planned this, you know, graph paper. I'm smarter than the average bearer, so I thought. I built a seam ripper, but anyway. So I made this quilt. I entered it in the quilt show, Smoky Mountain. I won the novice award. This was the 4th quilt that I ever did. All right, so my men's group, I'm making Quilts of Valor. This was my first Quilts of Valor that I decided to make. One of the guys that I was working with at the warehouse, his name's Kelly. I call him Big Homie. He's 6'9" and looks like your average biker would, but the nicest guy in the world. Anyway, I found out his dad was a World War II vet. I said, hey, Kelly, I want to give your dad a quilt. So I showed up at his house and attempted to award him the quilt, and he said, I don't deserve this. And I said, Mr. Carpenter, I said, if you don't deserve it, nobody else does either. I said, you didn't even just walk, I mean, you didn't even just ride a tank or a truck or jump into Normandy, you walked. So, and after that, Kelly had said that he learned more about what his dad did in the military in those 15 minutes of conversing with me than he did the whole time of his whole life. So, here's a picture of me and Mr. Carpenter, 94 years old, fell and broke his hip and still kicking chicken. Yeah, good times. All right, so going into that wonderful time in Iraq, January 1st of 2005, we crossed the border from Kuwait City from Kuwait into Iraq. Just left Cedar 2. We were 290 meters north, and the truck that I was in and the truck in front of me were blown up with an IED. Fortunately for me, all I got was the after effect of the IED. It did not move our vehicle. It didn't do any damage to us. Big cloud of dust. For whatever reason, the blasting cap went off, blew the dirt around it, and then one of the 5 rounds hit the truck in front of us, and it went up in the air. So, yeah, one of the events. So this is a video of a quilt being awarded in my absence. And I'm going to attempt to unmute it. Let's see if we can get this to play.
This is the quilt that you're being presented. It was made by Andrew Lee, the fellow soldier who served with you in Iraq in the same platoon. There are some gentlemen who actually do piece together quilts and make quilts, so it is unusual, but it's not unheard of. So
It's beautiful.
with this, go ahead and wrap the quilt. The quilt has a label that names Andrew as the maker of the quilt and the person who actually sandwiched the quilt and put everything together. In addition, we have a certificate that reads Carlos Smith, U.S.
Yeah, so. All right, so Quilts of Valor. So Quilts of Valor became my near and dear project. I got addicted to it, all because in the height of things, and even like I tell my wife, she always says she's there for me when I need her. Well, most of us, it's our burden to bear. Us veterans, we're headstrong, and we like to do our battles alone because we feel competent and independent. However, you'd be surprised the difference a blanket will make. Huge. So I saw the need for it, and my first year I committed to doing 12 Quilts of Valor, 1 a month. So that's what I did. The benefit of being a quilter myself is There are some times that I can hand select people that I want to receive Quilts of Valor and make them myself. Not that it would mean any less coming from anybody else, but it changes the dynamics just a little bit. So this is, oh gosh, I got so many good stories about Adam, but anyway, he was in Texas. I wasn't able to make it to Texas to award the quilt, so I had someone else do it. I'm not a big fan of hanging on to quilts, so let's see if I can get back to clicking. So Quilts of Valor, that wonderful little tiny machine, and of course when I see if I can get to it, more Quilts of Valor. More Quilts of Valor. There's going to be a bunch of slides of Quilts of Valor, obviously. Okay, so when I cut quilts, I'm not like your average person. I'm a little obsessive. So in this case, I believe I was cutting out 11. My wife said I wasn't spending any time with her, so I moved my cutting table into the dining room. I took over the breakfast bar between the kitchen and the dining room, and that way she could sit in the living room and watch TV or whatever else, and then that way we felt like we were spending time together. Yeah. Okay. This is my wife's fabric collection. It is not mine. Oops. Let's get somebody in. So I don't touch her fabric. She don't touch mine. It's a pretty. If I do want to use something, it can't be Christmas, can't be Halloween, and I have to do something really comical. So I wanted to make a camera strap. So I made it like a cape and was flopping it and trying to record a video. It was hilarious. She probably still has it and giggles today because of it. Get my little mouse back. All right, so when I do cut a quilt out, I usually cut out a couple variances, and so that's what this is. The blue border.
Go to our website,
And then a gray border. So all the same insides. Earlier I was talking about why I don't make 3 or 4 color quilts. It's because at that time I couldn't afford to. So I would buy 1 yard of this and 1 yard of that and used it for what I could. So that's why I cut out so many when I did. But Quilts of Valor, I was the first Friday artist in Knoxville at Sugar Mama's. I got to hang my quilts on the wall for 3 weeks. So those wonderful gentlemen in my men's group challenged me to do a 3-color quilt, so I did. When I worked at Specialty, this is a quilt that I made for Walt. He is a Marine. All right, I really hate to say this story, but I'm gonna tell it like it is. One day my wife and I were walking around Market Square, downtown at the farmer's market, and my aunt had called me and said, hey, I heard you're making a quilt for Uncle Glenn. I want to sew some of it. And of course, you know, panic mode goes into my brain. What do I say? So I said, I'm shopping and at the farmer's market. Can I call you back? So of course we get through the farmer's market and I call my mom and I was like, Mom, what do I tell her? And she's like, well, what do you mean? I was like, her seams sometimes don't line up. As it turns out, nobody makes a perfect quilt, but anyway, I tried to, but I already had this quilt planned of how I wanted it to look. So what I did was, I let her make the back and I made the front. That way when my great uncle's mad at her, he can look at my side. When he's mad at me, he can look at her side. So, it's pieced and quilted by my aunt and myself. My wife made the label for me. It was okay. Oh, come on in. So, military duty. This is the shot of the barracks in our wonderful 12 by 12 room that we get that's all brick. I bring 3M hooks with me so I can hang them on the wall, and I can hang a quilt. So I hung my quilt on the wall. That pattern is Sharon Henry Lake. Hero's Comfort is the name of it. So, of course, prep time for the quilt show. You know, last year I did and won a novice award, and no offense to anyone in here, now I'm thrown to the wolves with everybody else the next year because I'm no longer a novice. So what do you do to compete with people who've been quilting and sewing for 20 and 30 and 40 years? What do you really do? So I thought, well, maybe I can do a pixelated Batman or something. But then I thought, well, who's going to vote for that? I like it, but nobody else will. Slim, far and few between, right? So I thought, well, I better pick something crazy. So I chose a pixelated image of the flag raising at 9/11. I started it while I was there for my wonderful 10 days. I sewed 3,300 pieces, which you'll see in a second. But this is how I do it. This is 100 pieces laid out. They then become rows, one sewn to the next. And then rows turn into columns, becomes a 10 by 10 block. So, during my 10 days of duty, 3,300 pieces later, there it is. And of course, on the far right wall, you can see another quilt that I was working on too. And this is another quilt of Valor. To show that such a small world it is, this gentleman and I were in the same brigade, on the same base, ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the same place every day and never knew each other. We get back to Knoxville, Tennessee afterwards and meet. So, of course, I had to make a post out. For those of you who like pinwheels, I no longer like pinwheels. However, they can be a secondary pattern. And Darren, one of the guys in my group, is always pointing out where all my pinwheels are at. Another Hero's Comfort. I've done that pattern, I think, 4 times now. Cocoon is the name of this one. It's a Bella Rosa pattern. One of my official testers. I'm very OCD about where I put my stuff away when I'm done, so I would trim my quilts on the floor with a pair of scissors, and I would always, when I got done, I would go put the batting and the scraps all away and put my scissors back. By the time I came back out to the quilt, the dog was always laying on it. So they have been tested and approved.
Hero's Comfort was by who?
Sharon Henry Lake.
Sharon, I'm sorry.
Henry
Henry Lake.
Lake, yep. And this was, I quilted a quilt for another woman, which I didn't do very often, just because a little 9-inch throat, all I could do was wavy lines and meander. It wasn't nothing special. I got conned into doing a t-shirt quilt. I didn't know anything about stabilizers and all of that, so fortunately for me, the girl who convinced me to help her with this did the majority of the sewing. I just quilted, I just put it together and then quilted it, so. Yeah, I said never again. All right. My sister-in-law, I love her to death, but she kept bugging me for a quilt. I had a airmail that I had done 2 of, so I sold my first quilt to my sister-in-law. A guy I went to high school with wanted a quilt for his daughter. This is my first attempt at applique and thread painting. I didn't know anything about pricing. The quilt is 72 by 90, and he got it for $150. You don't know. You don't know what you don't know. All right, so my sister-in-law said, hey, I really like this quilt, but I want another one. I said, Cheryl, I got one in my brain working. When I get it figured out, I'll get it to you. So I saw this quilt that I liked. It was a red rooster pattern, and they used cheater fabric in it for all of the 2.5-inch squares, and then they used piece blocks for the rest of the stuff, but it was cheater stuff. It was already sewn half square triangles to look like half square triangles, but there was no seam line. It was just printed that way. And so I cut that thing apart and I changed the layout and design because, you know, my OCDs will only allow me to have so many red and so many blue, and they must be equal, and they must be proportionate, and they must be spaced correctly. So I fixed their layout, their plan, and then changed it to be my own by adding stars, shrinking stars, and making it consistent all the way through, because my eyes wouldn't allow me to look at it the way that it was. You know, those little intricacies of being a quilter. So here is said quilt. I then sent it to Arizona, where my sister-in-law got it. Woke up in the morning, it was outside her door. Yeah. And she's a big Second Amendment fan, and her and I both like Abraham Lincoln, and we're all about the Constitution. So I got to go down there when I was, of course, as a truck driver. I got to stop through there and spend a 34-hour break down there, and had some really intelligent conversations with people who are in it all day, every day, and not just the political side, but like the right side of it. You know, not the right or left, but I mean like the side that is factual. So they are very good at pulling out all the emotions and I don't want to say stuff that you're pushed with, but you are, you know, the media and all that stuff. We're looking at breaking it down words for words, black and white, thin black line, no gray area. So I really enjoyed the conversation I had down there with them. So I could only make sure that the quilt had something in it. So of course I made a quilt I made a quilt, non-Quilts of Valor pattern for my stepfather. And then I decided I would make a raffle quilt. Which I later learned that you're not allowed to do raffle quilts in the state of Tennessee, but the man hasn't showed up to arrest me yet, so I guess it's okay. I mean, all the proceeds went to charity, went to Quilts of Valor. So then I made one for my father-in-law. I also have I have a new favorite designer. She makes a lot of Quilts of Valor patterns. And they are very simple to make, and her patterns are very well thought out, and that is Lisa Sutherland of Quilt Jubilee, and you'll see several of her patterns as well in the next few slides. Lisa Sutherland, she's in Illinois, she's moving to Tennessee soon. Quilt Jubilee. Yep. Singular.
Sutherland, Southerland.
I don't know. I'm not the guy to commit one way or the other. I'll just say I don't know. All right, so Quilts of Valor National Sew Day. My wife and I went. She sewed, I talked. She calls me Chatty Cathy. Our goal was to sew a quilt. She got all of her pieces done and started working on mine. My brother convinced me to make a quilt for one of his friends. That's obviously a king. It was huge. Now I can't figure out which way to go. There we go. All right, so everybody asked, does my wife and I sew together? We do, and my sewing machine sets facing hers, that way we can look at each other and sew and talk, and on the end of the tables where our cutting and ironing station was, so it worked out really good. Quilts of Valor at one of the mandatory fun days that the Army has. You must go and you must have fun. In my living room, I usually have a Veterans Day gathering or Memorial Day, and I took it as an opportunity to award a quilt. This is one that my wife had made. Dennis and I in the men's group, I saw cheater fabric that was 2.5-inch squares. I thought that'd be really cool to make a quilt out of. And as it turned out, Christy, my wife, made it for Molly, and it's organized yet random. Random is very hard for us to do. Put it in a brown paper bag and draw one out, and that's just what you sew. Two end up the same, they end up the same. So that was what this quilt was. Ah, Lucas. Even another branch of service, Air Force, good guy. Ordered him a quilt at the house. My brother-in-law. Every male in my family has served, except for my brother and my father. My father was a police officer. My brother was a firefighter. Two of my brother-in-laws are also service members, both Army. Random story here. A woman called me and said, "Hey, I really want to get a quilt for my son," and she went into this big long story. But he's deployed. But my father, I want his quilt to have my father's something in remembrance of his service. I said, "Well, does he have a quilt of valor?" She said, "No, he's not doing well. I'm not sure that you could get him one in time." I said, "Ma'am, I have a quilt right here that somebody had given me. I will be over today. Let's award this." And she's like, "No, today won't work. I want my family to be there. So how about tomorrow or Saturday?" I said, "How about Saturday?" So Saturday, 10 o'clock in the morning, we went over there and awarded this gentleman a quilt. One of my co-drivers, my very first trainee in a semi-truck. Yeah, good times. And of course awarded it at Smoky Mountain Brewery. All right, Curtis Thompson. During my 2 deployments, he was the driver both times. I had intended on getting him a quilt, just wasn't sure when it was going to happen. A woman asked me to come and speak in Clarksville. Just so happens this is where Curtis Thompson lives, so I thought, well, shoot, this is a perfect opportunity. So I invited him to listen to me speak. And he's one of them people, you know, that stands in front of a crowd and steals the crowd, you know, like that's just his human nature. That's just the way he is. So I knew that. So I was up-dressed by him and up-classed. Never have I thought that he would show up in a bow tie. And never did I think that I would be able to surprise him like I did, because he really thought he was coming to hear me speak, which he did. I mean, he got to hear me speak a little bit. All right, there are some individuals who don't like traditional red, white, and blue. I really like the Road to Oklahoma pattern. However, I altered it by changing 2 of the outside pieces of my blocks to be a variant color, which makes it stand out less on the diagonal. It makes more eye focal points on the stars rather than the diagonals. So it was my variance. But anyway, Master Sergeant Parnell, probably the most militant person I know, has lived, eat, breathed, slept the Army, and he doesn't sleep much. But his wife and I went in collaboration. I went and talked to her, and we planned this out, and I'm gonna let Jeff in. Come on in, Jeff. All right, so I awarded him his quilt. His wife and they were going camping in Gatlinburg, so I met him at establishment on the east side of town and awarded him his quilt. His wife said this is the only picture of him smiling since like 2nd grade. So, all right, in the semi-truck. Yes, I did indeed have my sewing machine in the semi-truck. I sewed in the passenger seat when I was stopped for the night. After I upgraded sewing machines to my brother, because I didn't really like the red or pink Eversewn sitting there, I was really worried what other truckers were going to say, but nobody ever came and said anything anyway. But so here is my setup. Yes, that is a full-size ironing board. Yes, yes, I did set it up in the middle so that I could sew and turn and iron and then go back to sewing. And for all of you who say the dining room table is too small of a space, I promise, where there's a will, there's a way. And that's my grandmother had made 3 quilts when she was 13, gave gave one to my mom, one to both my uncles, and my mom had given my brother hers before I started sewing. It was ugly yellow and brown. So my uncle decided that he would give me this one. So that's what hangs on my wall most of the time. Right now my wife has one hung up.
What's that pattern called?
The pattern is called Misfortune. It is a Civil War pattern. We figure this quilt was made right around 1948. So. Okay, Stitcher's Playhouse. Quilt shop in Smyrna, Tennessee. I was there for duty. I had forgotten my thread. I don't like Hobby Lobby thread. That's the only craft store. There's a sewing fabric store there in town. I thought, okay, I'm gonna go. So I went over there and got thread, and that was my escape from military duty. Saturday, I would take a 2-hour lunch, and I would go over to the fabric store and became good friends with the girls there and the owner, Anne. And she decided that she would allow me to allow my quilt to hang, and featured me for a month. And I was attempting to get Moda to allow my quilt to hang in Houston, and for whatever reason that fell through. And Anne had sent a message to Becky Navarro and had taken care of getting my quilt to go to Houston. So this was June, and I knew that it had to be gone in like August. So
So that's slightly different from that one, right?
no, that's the exact quilt.
Is it? I don't see the guy to the right of the pole.
Look through your phone, sir. Just
Oh,
turn the
it's like
just look at the camera in your phone,
Okay.
and I'll explain it real quick. What happens is anybody in here, all of our brains put together isn't strong or capable enough to condense all of the pixels and all of the images at once. But the camera on your phone will. So if you look through the camera, it'll shrink all of it, all the same, and allow you to see the picture. Otherwise, you gotta stand 48 feet back.
it's like the that museum in Paducah has one of those, or
Some guy
a bunch
did
of them.
that where
It's
you
like
had
an
to
optical
stay way
illusion.
back.
You have to look at it through your camera to see it. Really cool.
Oh, somebody else trying to.
Is there a way, and that it doesn't have, like, a good camera?
If you don't have a good, you just gotta stand back 40
You just
feet.
gotta, that means you gotta have good eyesight.
Yeah. Alright, so shows a picture of the stitching in it. Angie from Five Little Monkeys in Weaverville, North Carolina quilted it for me. I wasn't going to try to do my little 9-inch Juki. I would have like an inch by the time I got this king size thing on to the end of it rolled up. It would have never made it. So once again, here's another Quilts of Valor. It is not your typical red, white, and blue. My great uncle, my other great uncle, is a Vietnam vet as well, and he's the biggest UT fan I know. So I figured this would be an opportunity to make him his quilt. That fabric panel had come out, and I chopped it up and did a bunch of crazy stuff with the other blocks. So at the Smoky Mountain Quilt Show, I awarded him his Quilts of Valor.
When was this? When were you at Smoky Mountain Quilt Show?
Last year.
That was the year you were in too.
Mhm.
He was in. That's where we saw it. It wasn't Paducah. That's where we saw it.
As soon as you
Yeah,
walk in
Pigeon
the door.
Forge, right? Pigeon Forge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was at Pigeon Forge
Mhm.
in the fall.
Yes.
That's where
Spring.
we
So
saw
that's
it.
whatever
where,
it was.
and he had a quilt there. That's why we recognize this. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so Ann from Citrus Playhouse asked me to speak at the Tennessee Valley Quilters Association yearly meeting. I don't know the dynamics of how God's plan worked out, but it did. Other people were supposed to speak, and then it just worked out that I ended up being their speaker. Teresa Duria Wong was the morning speaker, and I was one in the afternoon. And this is her and I having a conversation about finish, about how two pieces of fabric can start out the exact same from the ground, from a piece of cotton, go through the mill, be made as two same pieces of fabric, and then based on what company is dyeing or producing the end result fabric can change the littlest bit of the way the fabric feels. This fabric in particular evidently was heated a little bit too much, therefore was a little bit thinner and a tighter weave. Or so I thought, when it was the same regular gray goods that go through the process. And she's like the who's who of cotton and production and all of those crazy relations and how all that whole thing works. But she's like super smart. She's the first real person that I got to listen to that not about just trying to sell me something, you know, fabric based. She wanted me to understand the concept and how it really did work. All right, 425 people in attendance. I spoke. I felt like a rock star. I had one of those Britney Spears things on, you know. And I tried to build a quilt frame out of PVC pipe. You know, guys like to try to do things and they think they can make it work, but little did I account for my 17 pounds of my quilt was not going to hang via PVC, even with the 2 support braces in the back of it. We ended up having to weave a ladder in there and hang it. So anyway. All right. Judith Thompson, the commentator of the event, gave me this wonderful bag. It was crammed full with a bunch of stuff. She was an elementary school teacher and like the highlight of anything that could work a crowd. So she said that the only reason why she dumped it out after she dumped it out was so that everybody could see how much fabric she really could fit into a bag. And there was 3 things of batting and a whole bunch of fat quarters. After she dumped that bag out, Quilts of Valor, Ginger Fondren, they gave me half of the fat quarters that they brought in. So by the end of it, I had 2 completed quilts, 4 panels, and I believe like 407 fat quarters. And of course, yeah, it was a lot of fabric. And you know me and my OCD, I can't let it sit long. It's got to get cut up and made into a quilt. So we went to work. All right, so once again, Judith up there, and everybody remembers events differently. Like 2 people could see the same thing and tell the story different. So understand that this is my perception of how this event happened. I'm sitting in the front row, still in awe of this fabric that they just gave me, because up until then I'd supported my own Quilts of Valor habit and my own fabric budget and all of that. And Judith, I remember her saying, in closing, and then a woman stood up in the back and said, I want to give Andrew a certain dollar amount to go towards his long arm. And the reason for that is because after I got done speaking, a woman had asked me what my plan with my quilt was. I said I was going to beg, borrow, plead, steal, okay, maybe not steal, but do anything I could to get myself a different long arm because I wanted something more than just my Juki. And you know, I had done my research and I knew what I wanted. But so in that, she said, oh, and a woman in the vicinity of her also said, I want to give him some money. And Judith, without missing a beat, reached behind the podium and dumped out coffee filters and truck stop coffee packets and just dumped them on the floor and said, this is my perception, you ladies fill it with pennies, that'd be cute. And this box got passed around. Inside, and of course, that event closed, everybody left, I packed up the truck. I was delivering boats to Tacoma, Washington. I had stopped the semi-truck there. My wife picked me up in the pickup truck. We went back to Stitcher's Playhouse because they had a quilt there. Ann had a quilt that I had done that was underneath one of her displays. And in the box was $3,188 to go towards my long arm. And also in that box was a business card. Of course, it's the only one I carry in here, so it's not like I have to dig through anything. That says, I would like to make up whatever more you need to get your long arm. Call me. So of course, I'm in shock. My wife and I went to dinner, then we went back to the Airbnb, and I called her, and she introduced herself and told me who she was and what she did, and she said, so what do you need? And once again, this is my perception of the phone call and how it went, because we all remember things different. She says, what do you need? And I said, ma'am, I don't need anything. And she, in a plain as day, I still hear her say, okay, we'll go about this a different way. And she said, so what long arm do you want? And I said, ma'am, I can't fully expect you to spend $40,000 on a man you don't even know. And she said, I just want you to know that I've been following you for some time, and I feel this would be a great way to tribute to my husband, who passed away from Agent Orange and being a veteran. I had to stop at that point and tell her I would call her back. It's the first time I truly cried since September of 2006. And I think for 30 minutes I cried. Raw, pure emotion that someone would be so generous and think of a way like this. I mean, it's world changing to me. So I drove from Smyrna, Tennessee all the way to Cheyenne, Wyoming before I called her. And she said, come on in, Kim. So she said, I need you to tell me where to send the check, figure out what machine you want, who's going to service it. So I got in touch with Gamble, and on September 20th, Larry and Cindy Culbertson delivered and set up my Statler by Gamble. 12-foot frame, computerized. Yeah, world changing. And fortunately for me, someone captured some good pictures. October 9th of last year, I turned in my semi-truck. I am no longer a truck driver. I am a full-time long armor for hire. I stay competitive at 2 cents an inch. I stock 3 different types of batting. I try to quilt 4 quilts a week, plus all my other ones that I'm working on. While in Houston, I was interviewed by Alex Anderson. All right, so after, I'm trying to think of where I was. After the trip to Tacoma, I came home, I picked up another load. I went to Arizona, and I got home, and then I was going to Kendrick, Washington on the next trip. And Teresa had called me and said, hey, now that your fairy godmother got you your long arm, what are you going to do with your quilt? And I sarcastically said, well, you're my agent. Aren't you supposed to figure that out? Teresa has been very nice and has catered to me and my 1 bazillion questions that I've had. And she said, well, where do you really want it to go? I said, I don't want it to go to Smithsonian because they'll just, sell it or charter it out and all that. I want it to go somewhere where somebody's going to appreciate it, where it's going to be, utilized and shared. And she's like, okay, well, what would you think about the International Quilt Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska? I said, okay. So on my way to Kendrick, Washington, I stopped at the museum, parked the semi-truck on the west side of town, took a Uber over there to the museum, walked in, and went to the 2nd floor. As I walked into the main gallery, one of the founding woman, I want to say Artist James, but that's not what it is. Her story is on the wall, and in that paragraph biography, it says that she wants to preserve quilts for everybody to see, forever. So, she said, I left there, I called her back, I said, hey, I just stopped in there, I agree that'd be a good place, let's do what we need to do. She said, okay, I'll call you back in a couple weeks. I delivered in Washington, I picked up boat motors, I was headed back to Mississippi, and she called me and said, hey, it's been accepted, the museum will be calling you soon. So, on November 4th of this year, my quilt is going to the International Quilt Museum in Lincoln, and that's where it'll live for the rest of its life.
This one?
Yes, sir.
Great.
Okay, so there's a woman who quilts that's in Poland. She does a bunch of free motion stuff, and I said that this was my plan, that I wanted to be at this caliber after 90 days. Realistic expectations. Here it is, almost 9 months. I'm not there yet, but we're getting there. And of course, after creating this quilt, I have a plan to make 4 other quilts, and I wasn't sure which ones. So after conversing with Teresa and my fairy godmother, I have chosen the flag raising at 9/11, and on a whim, I called the original photographer and I said, hey, what would you, when I called him, he didn't answer. I got his voicemail, left him a voicemail, and then like 15 minutes later, he called me back and he just said, hey, I just want you to know right up front, I can't give you the copyright to that picture, yada, 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 the whole legal thing that he's got to say. And I said, sir, I'm just going to be honest with you. I wasn't calling to ask permission. I'm calling as artistic, common courtesy that I am going to make a quilt with that. And he says, well, what are you going to do with it? I said, well, I'm going to make it and use it as my soapbox to tell my story and try to convince people to take up quilting or some sort of hobby that gives them some sort of peace of mind like quilting has done for me. Saved my marriage, and my wife probably would have buried me in the backyard if it hadn't been for quilting. So I want to share that with some other people, You never know. Yeah, I see it. Yeah. She's gonna,
that's where I'm going to bury him.
Yeah. Skill it over the head and bury it in the backyard.
Tear the body down.
So he said, so what are you going to do after that? I said, well, I'm probably going to try to get it in a museum somewhere. He's like, well, what makes you think you can get a quilt into a museum? I said, well, it just so happens I have a really good agent. And he says, well, when you get it done, let's discuss it. So he's got some connection, and this next one will be 22,400 pieces, 3/4 inch finished squares.
You cut them all?
So wait a minute, is this a picture? Okay, so this is a photograph.
Okay.
How do you do it?
Yeah.
There's a software, pixel-stitch.net. It's a website you go to, you upload your picture. After my little Zoom thing, I can go through that, and I'll do it so you can see how it works.
Okay.
So anyway, that's the picture, and of course, I had no thoughts that a woman would donate the fabric to make my quilt however she has. So I chose the Andover linen texture. I am 3,400 pieces in. 3,400 out of 22,400.
Are those all machine stitches?